This episode is sponsored by Well Balanced Nutrition and 360 Health.
Welcome to the Health Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
Hey, Kristen, are you hungry?
No, but I'm hungry for more information on books.
Well, we've been talking about guts, and we picked another gut book. This one's called The Mind-Gut Connection, How the Hidden Conversation Within Our Bodies Impacts Our Mood, Our Choices, and Our Overall Health. And it's by Emeran Mayer, who is an MD, and he has been studying the mind-body, brain-body interactions for over 40 years. He's the executive director of the G. Oppenheimer Center for Neurobiology of Stress and Resilience and the coordinator of the Digestive Diseases Research Center at the University of California, LA. So he's been writing about this topic and investigating it for a good amount of time. He is an MD, as I mentioned, not a PhD, but an MD, which, I don't know. We've talked about what do credentials mean when learning is understanding. But anyway, it's nice to look at the experiences these fellows have. And Dr. Pearl Muter, who has written Grain Brain and Grain Belly, or Wheat Belly. I think he wrote Wheat Belly. Anyway, Grain Brain for sure. He gave it a thumbs up, and he's a pretty respected authority on this too. You want me to kick it off?
Well, I was going to say that, May is Mental Health Month.
Okay.
And it's really neat to think about the connection between our mental health and our gut, something that's not usually connected. So I'm excited to dive into this topic.
Well, before I talk about how the book's structured, why don't you kick us off with that little, he has a little story that he relates that I think most of us would say, oh, that could be me.
Yeah, so picture this. You are sitting in traffic. Maybe you're fuming because a driver cut you off.
Oh, by the way, on the way to the studio today, I hit a traffic jam out on I-40 in my town, which means nothing to the rest of you all. But I wasn't expecting it. I thought, oh, I'm going to be late. So there I kicked this whole thing in.
This could be you. So your stomach went into vigorous contractions, which increased its production of acid and slowed the emptying of the scrambled eggs you may or may not have had for breakfast. Meanwhile, your intestines twisted and spit mucus and other digestive juices. A similar yet distinct pattern happens when you're anxious or upset. When you're depressed, your intestines hardly move at all. In fact, we now know that your gut mirrors every emotion that arises in your brain.
And there you go. So I'm thinking the focus of this book compared to, we're going to be reviewing or have reviewed, I don't know what sequence this comes in, a Healthy Gut, Healthy You book, which really focused on what I would call disorders of the gut that you would recognize as gut-related. This book is focusing on mental health or brain disorders and the relationship to the gut. And what does a healthy relationship look like, and when it's disrupted, what happens? So when Dr. Mayer was prefacing his book, he talked about published human studies so far demonstrate associations, not causation, of microbes and specific diagnoses. And we're not sure if the microbiome changes are causing the disease or if they are the consequence of the underlying brain disorder. Disease-related dietary pattern, because, when you're sick, you eat differently, right?
True.
Or medication use. But he does say it's clear that there is a connection between the microbiome and cognitive function. That means the way you think. So who's driving the bus here? Is the brain controlling the gut, or is the gut controlling the brain?
Good question.
And are there two brains? Yeah, it turns out maybe there are. There's the one that we all know lives up in our head in the cranium. And the other one is the enteric nervous system, which they call the little brain or the second brain. And it directs the whole organization of what your gut's doing. And there's no conscious thought about it. and it's sending signals back up to the brain, telling the brain what to do. So who's in control here? Are we? This is a philosophical question, which I just love. It's like, are we human and calling the shots, or are we just a vehicle for all these little microbes, and we're doing what they want us to do? We're going to get the stuff for them, and we're letting them replicate and grow and go to somebody else, and we're just secondary. And I don't think we like to think about that, but
it's a weird thing to think about.
I think that's where this investigation of ecology, because we were talking about looking at our health from an ecological perspective, and that we are in relationship with other organisms. And I remember back in 2009, I'm a big fan of TED Talks. And
oh, me too.
The original ones and the TED Talks themselves are really substantial things to experience. And Bonnie Bassler, I think is how you say her name, was talking about how bacteria talk to each other. And it's the language of bacteria. And one of the things she said in her presentation in 2009 was that we're only 10% human cells. So we're like 1% human, and or when you look at 10% human, when you look at 1 trillion cells, and 10 trillion cells are bacteria. We're 1 trillion, bacteria are 10 trillion.
Wow.
And then when you look at the DNA concentrations and how much DNA is out there, we're only 1% human. When we look at all the DNA. Now, since 2009, there's been some more exploration, and they're saying that her numbers were a little skewed, that maybe it's a 1-to-1 ratio, human to bacteria. So we don't know yet. But anyway, it is an interesting thing to think about, this chemical signaling that's going on in our bodies, controlling intelligent thought.
Yeah, I want to read directly from the book here. When you said the enteric nervous system,
Mm-hmm.
He says, a remarkable network of 50 million nerve cells wrapped around the intestine from the esophagus to the rectum. The second brain may be smaller than its 3-pound counterpart in your head, but when it comes to digestion, it's brilliant.
Yeah, that's good. Well, what Dr. Mayer also says is, as professional providers, or maybe as people, we need to shift our focus from treating disease toward achieving optimal health. And I like that. That resonates with me. And I when I'm in my talking hat groups, I always say my job is to help people find their optimum health. And we do that with lifestyle, we do that with products, but we do that with education. And my business is 360 Health for You. You can find me at 360health4you.com and access some of these ideas about how to improve your lifestyle or to maintain it. If you have a healthy lifestyle, we want to help you maintain it. What is optimal health? Well, he suggests that it's complete physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and social well-being with peak vitality, which I love that idea, optimal personal performance, which I love helping people achieve, and high productivity. That's his definition of optimal health. And I think that is, I will accept that definition.
Yeah, I would say that's something that Well-Balanced Nutrition strives to help people with as well.
Mm-hmm. And, they say that you can tell if somebody has optimal health because they're usually very happy people. They're optimistic. They have lots of friends, and they enjoy their work. So it's pretty easy to detect if you've got optimal health. If you're, if you're projecting those things, you most likely have some good health going on.
Right.
And how many of us are around negative people who are complaining about everything? The traffic, like you just said. I'm in a traffic jam. They don't let that roll off their back. They focus on it. And now that sets up this whole sequence of events that we can, begin to talk about. The other thing that I wanted to mention is, where does the U.S. rank in healthcare? Since 1970, the per capita expense for healthcare in the United States has increased 2,000%. Since 1970. That's in my lifetime. The World Health Organization ranks the U.S. healthcare system, and this was in 2000, as the highest in cost, number 37 in overall performance, and we're number 72 out of 191 in overall level of health of our population. Now, when they did this more recently, we still cost the most, and we are last in overall performance. We have the United States health status compared to other countries is not good. So why is that? We have an obesity epidemic going on, metabolic disorders, autoimmune disorders, asthma, allergies, functional bowel disease, degenerative neurological diseases. How about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's on the old age end? But on the developmental end, we're seeing increases in autism. So this author is really concerned about the trajectory of health in the United States. Looking like not going up, it's going down.
Right, and it's a very complex case with not one answer to that question as to why we're seeing that.
Yeah, but he seems to think all we need to do, here's his solution, we need to become ecological system engineers.
Oh, well, how do we do that?
Well, we're going to engineer our microbiota. We're looking at how we got here. We've come from explaining things from an industrial perspective instead of an ecological perspective. Production, we've looked at mechanistic explanations of how things have worked, and we have ignored this brain-gut axis in our healthcare decisions. We are hardwired.
Well, and what is this connection between our mood and mental health with our gut? How does he tie that together?
Well, I think he's saying our gut is a sensory organ. And when we look at the connection to the brain, we have a cranial nerve called the vagal nerve, cranial nerve number 10, and it comes out of your head. It runs down through your neck, and it goes through the chest cavity, and it's innervating the pharynx and the esophagus and the stomach and their vagal branches to the small intestine and so on. And it is a mixed nerve. Now, when we say mixed nerve, that means it is carrying signals up to the brain, sensory pathway, and motor signals or action signals back down to the gut. But as you mentioned, this little brain in the middle called the enteric nervous system is at the local area making all these decisions. So it's sensing these artificial sweeteners that we might have ingested or these emulsifiers that came in with the processed food. It's sensing the level of carbohydrates and so on and so forth. And it's dealing with them. It's not engaging the higher cortical centers up in your head. But your head can override those signals. Like if in your head you see something that scares you, then your hypothalamus and your signaling to your adrenals is going to do the flight or fight response. You're going to have a surge of those adrenal hormones, cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and your cells are going to respond to that at the local level. And so it sets in motion something over and beyond what was going on at the local level. Now, at the local level, it seems like they're making a whole bunch of neurotransmitters that we didn't realize were being generated in the gut. And one in particular, your favorite.
Serotonin.
Did you learn anything about serotonin in this book? About how much is made down there? It's like 90% is sequestered down there in the gut.
It says, we know today that 95% of the body's serotonin is actually contained in specialized cells in the gut, and these serotonin-containing cells are influenced by what we eat. How fascinating. Your gut gathers information about your food and your environment every millisecond, and it does this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, even as you sleep. Yeah,
and if you're eating tryptophan, do you eat it? I think I eat tryptophan. It's an amino acid in it.
In protein-containing foods.
Yeah, that tryptophan seems to be necessary to make that serotonin.
It is. It is a precursor, and so eating some protein-rich foods has been known to help with your mood.
And it turns out that if we don't have a lot of serotonin, we may feel depressed. So serotonin helps stimulate signaling from the vagus nerve, and it also stimulates the enteric nervous system. But if we don't have enough of it on board, we can have symptoms of depression. And so there are these selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors that called Prozac and things like that are prescribed to people. But you know what, Kristen, a lot of the books we've been reading, they say there are other solutions rather than these SSRIs to treat depression. And one of them is exercise. And now we're looking at diet and this microbiome.
Yes, I don't want to discredit the importance of medication or say that we shouldn't use medicine. I think it's a case-to-case basis, and there is nothing wrong with taking depression or anxiety medicine whatsoever.
As a first line of defense?
Well, I think it depends on the person, honestly. I don't want to come across as any shame or guilt, and mental health is super important, and you do what you need to do to feel good. But what we know is that exercise can be very powerful in that way, and in this book, it's sharing that gut health can be very impactful as well, whether that's, reducing small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or, maybe it's probiotics and their relationship to our mood. I don't know. There's other ways, which I think is really cool to talk about.
Yeah, and it's down at that chemical level, though, where we're talking about the receptors on cells and how they respond to the connection. When these receptors are fit with another chemical, they turn on a process in the cell, or they turn off a process in the cell. And so that's that control, that balancing of keeping things in that homeostatic range that will create that optimal health that we want to enjoy. He talks about disruption in the microbiota, this dysbiosis conversation again, creating, and we see this in other books we're reading, that when the healthy bacteria are minimized and the unhealthy are in overgrowth, the balance is disrupted. That's when we begin to see the injury and the inflammation and the consequences of the inflammation. I have had experience with someone I knew that got a C. difficile infection. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he talks in here, and I don't think we've talked about it in any of our other books. There's a therapeutic technique now that can be shocking the first time you hear about it. It's a fecal transplant, where you take feces from a healthy individual and you implant it in the person that's suffering. And they have seen tremendous recovery from this deadly C. diff. It is, and when you see someone who is in the middle of that infection, they're losing fluids like crazy because the gut is just squeezing, trying to expel the invader. I mean, that's what you're trying. The gut's really responsive to invaders. So you'll vomit or you'll have diarrhea. And anybody's had food poisoning can identify with that pretty significantly. And it's not fun, but it's what your body's doing to protect your cells. It's saying, you brought something in here that's not good. We're getting rid of it. And we got a way to do that. We're going to increase motility, and we're going to increase the osmotic potential and bring fluid out of the cells in the body and wash it out of here. All not good. Well, when you do that, you wash out a lot of bacteria, and then you've disrupted the bacteria, and reestablishing that can either go well or not. So that's why post-infections, it takes a little while to get that reestablished. And so the fecal transplant, I think, is, if you haven't ever read about it, he does a nice discussion of that in this book. It's something to know about. And we will probably see more and more of that in therapies.
Yeah, right now the only thing it's used for that I know of is the C. diff. But like you said, now that we know of it and how important it is for that treatment, we might see it in other areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he talks about lactobacillus and bifidobacteria. Again, if you read anything about guts and you want to find out about probiotics, those are some strains of probiotics that you'll run into.
They're well studied and well known.
Mm-hmm. And there are also some gram-negative bacteria, which doesn't mean much to anybody unless you work in a lab. But there are two categories, the Firmicutes and the proteobacteria, that are not the lacto and the bifidobacteria that I just mentioned. They're other types of microbes, but they say that if you're eating a high animal fat diet, you're going to have an increase in these other bacteria that may overcompensate the healthy, beneficial ones and get you out of whack. So again, I think we've learned that there's no one size fits all. And another book we've read, and we'll be talking about if we haven't already, The Healthy Gut, Healthy You, he emphasizes, Dr. Ruscio in that book, about one thing is not going to work for everybody. You have to figure out which body you have and which kind of microbiota lives in you, and then feed it accordingly.
Exactly.
Yeah, and this author, I don't think, got that specialized. He was still sort of on the one-for-all discussion.
Right, but he does have some good kind of generalized recommendations that could work for most. And, one that I remember from the book is eliminating or reducing the amount of processed foods you have, which could be a source of high fat, if you're having fast food burgers a lot or whatever. And it could also, processed foods could also be a source of those additives that he wants you to avoid that don't show up in our whole foods, but are in things on the shelves to keep them stabilized or to keep them, the product mixed together or whatever it needs.
Yeah, and if it doesn't taste good and look good, we're not going to eat it. So the food scientists do have trouble satisfying us. We're saying we want something that looks good and tastes good, but they say, well, to do that, we got to put all this crap in there.
And then you're like, but I don't want any crap
I don't want the crap in my food. Well, help us here. So, yeah, it's tough.
It's tough to be a food scientist.
It is
for
tough.
Sure.
I think so. And to make a living.
Yes. But I think that in general, for everybody, for mental health concerns, for gut health and overall health, that, the more we move away from those processed foods, a little bit is fine. But if you're cooking at home, if you're making a lot of your food at home or farm to table, that's going to benefit your gut, your mental health, and help you prevent disease. And at Well Balanced Nutrition, that's what we help you do. We have lots of meal planning tools and strategies we like to share for busy people who would like to cook at home more often or eat healthier foods. Visit us at wellbalancednutrition.com. Reach out. We'd love to connect with you.
And Kristen, we've talked about healthy lifestyles, and we talk about living in community and social interactions being important to our health. One of the things that this author talks about is adverse childhood events influencing our future health. And since this is Mental Health Month, you mentioned, I thought we might want to just hit that a little bit. What he says is science solidly supports the view that adversity experienced early in life, including poor mothering, can hardwire heightened stress sensitivity in our brains, and that this programming can be transmitted over generations, perpetuating a vulnerability for a variety of brain disorders. And so, paying attention to learning how to be good parents and seeking help, if you've not been parented well yourself, is finding ways to break these cycles, because we are seeing generational effects. And I like that Dr. Mayer does call attention to this, and he talks about, psychiatric help is very beneficial. You can learn mechanisms. We can change behaviors. We can do better. But also, in those early years, we're seeing that the microbiota gets set up. And so if a child is under continual stress, that's when that really has huge effects on establishing their gut microbiota.
And that kind of opens the door to a conversation on social issues and economic issues, because if you are born in a situation where domestic violence or you're at a lower socioeconomical status, then that sets you up for these potential health concerns, and that's not right. I feel like that could open like a conversation about how we could do a better job in America of supporting all lives.
Yeah, it brings up a whole bunch of controversial things, because choosing to be a parent is different than oh, I'm going to be a parent. I don't have the resources to be a parent. I didn't want to be one anyway. So that whole idea of reproductive responsibility, that's
another conversation.
Yeah, it is another conversation, and it's not an easy one. And I don't know that we're talking about these things much anymore. It seems to me our conversations are about having fun and what's next, and there's some of these serious things that if we paid attention to, the quality of all of our lives would be improved.
And this goes into so many times in the podcast we've talked about gut health comes stress. And like you said, we've set up our lives to be so stressful, whether it's from financial issues or we're working our butts off,
or even our news broadcasting, or our constant connection to information. And no downtime.
Do you just want to escape to the woods sometimes? Because I know I do.
Yeah. And actually, I want us to read a book about forest bathing. I've got that on my wish list.
Oh, yes, we should. That would be awesome.
Yeah, but I do think it's important for us to assess and just breathe for a moment and say, health check. Am I living the way I want to be living? Am I making the decisions that are going to serve me well? Are they going to serve my family or my friends? Because we all need each other, and we know that. We know we're connected. When life hits a group in your circle, you want to be there to support them, right?
Exactly. And that kind of circles back to what you were saying in the book, that, if a mom is stressed out with a baby, that's going to affect the baby. So how can we support mothers? How can we support women and each other?
And let dads be part of this too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I enjoyed this book. It's a very pleasant read, full of good ideas and explained at a level that you could engage in it. But I think focusing not always on just how much acid am I secreting? Do I have enough enzymes to digest my food? Am I eating the right proteins and balance and stuff? This is saying that's important, but also the way you create your day is going to affect that bacteria as well. Not just what you're putting into it, but the environment that you're creating for it.
Yes, I loved how you summed that up for us.
Okay.
And I think that's what's great about this book is that there's gut health in terms of the chemical
biology of what it's doing,
and nutrition, but also that lifestyle approach, like you said. So great summary. Hope you check out the book, Mind Gut Connection. And thanks so much for listening. Have a great day. And
I'm Eleanor at 360healthforyou.com. And if you want to talk about ways to support your gut health, I'm here for you. Have a great day.
And opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the expressed written consent of Kristen and Eleanor.